In a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other's names, there was one man who ruled the courthouse with an iron grip: Judge Richard Holloway. He wasn't just any judge. He was feared and revered in equal measure. People whispered about him behind closed doors, calling him cold, calculating, and corrupt. But no one dared to say it aloud because Judge Holloway had friends in high places, especially among the local police force. Together, they formed a tight-knit circle of power that seemed impossible to break. One sunny afternoon, the courtroom buzzed with tension as Judge Holloway presided over yet another controversial case. This time, a group of police officers stood accused of using excessive force during an arrest. Witnesses claimed the officers had gone too far, but under Judge Holloway's watchful eye, those claims were quickly dismissed. The officers walked out of the courtroom smiling, patting each other on the back like they'd won a game rather than escaped accountability. It was business as usual for them, but for the people watching from the gallery, it felt like another blow to justice. After the hearing ended, Judge Holloway invited the officers into his private chambers for what he called a little celebration. Bottles of champagne were popped open, glasses clinked, and laughter echoed through the room. They joked about how easy it was to manipulate the system, congratulating themselves on their cleverness. "Another day, another victory," one officer said, raising his glass. The others cheered, oblivious to the fact that someone outside their inner circle was paying close attention. Sitting quietly in the back row of the courtroom was a black woman who had been attending these hearings for weeks. Her name was Evelyn Carter, though no one in the room knew her yet. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, always dressed neatly in modest clothing. To most observers, she looked like just another spectator, perhaps a curious citizen or a family member of someone involved in the cases. But Evelyn wasn't there by chance. Every note she scribbled in her notebook, every furrowed brow as she listened intently, hinted at something deeper. Evelyn had noticed patterns in Judge Holloway's behavior long before today. Cases involving law enforcement almost always ended in favor of the officers, regardless of the evidence presented. Witnesses suddenly changed their stories. Documents went missing, and charges disappeared without explanation. Something was rotten in this town, and Evelyn was determined to find out exactly what it was. She had spent countless hours researching, gathering information, and piecing together fragments of the truth. And now, sitting in that courtroom, she could feel the weight of her findings pressing down on her. As the celebration continued behind closed doors, Evelyn remained seated, her eyes fixed on the door leading to the judge's chamber. There was a fire burning inside her, fueled by years of frustration and injustice. She knew she couldn't take on Judge Holloway alone, but she also knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. Today might be the day everything changed, for better or worse. The courtroom slowly emptied as people left, shaking their heads in disappointment or muttering under their breath about how unfair the system was. But Evelyn stayed put, clutching her notebook tightly. She glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then stood up, straightened her shoulders, and took a deep breath. Whatever happened next, she was ready. As the laughter and clinking of glasses continued in Judge Holloway's chambers, Evelyn Carter remained a silent figure in the courtroom. The grand clock on the wall ticked loudly, echoing through the now empty hall. She sat still for a moment, her mind racing with thoughts about what she was about to do. This wasn't just another day for her. It was the culmination of years of pain, patience, and preparation. Every note in her worn-out notebook, every late night spent piecing together evidence, had led her to this very moment. Finally, Evelyn stood up, clutching her folder tightly against her chest. Her steps were deliberate but calm as she approached the heavy wooden door leading to the judge's chamber. Before knocking, she paused, taking one last deep breath to steady herself. Then, with quiet confidence, she rapped her knuckles firmly against the door. On the other side, the celebration came to an abrupt halt. Judge Holloway frowned, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Who is it?" he barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the lingering cheerfulness in the room. "It's me," Evelyn replied calmly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "I need to speak with you, Your Honor." The bailiff stationed outside hesitated, unsure how to handle the situation. He glanced at Evelyn, then back at the judge, who waved him off impatiently. "Let her in," Judge Holloway snapped, though his tone suggested more curiosity than concern. After all, who could possibly disrupt their little victory party? Evelyn stepped into the room, her presence immediately drawing stares from everyone inside. The officers exchanged puzzled glances, while Judge Holloway leaned back in his chair, studying her with a mixture of irritation and mild interest. To them, she looked unremarkable. A black woman in plain clothes, holding nothing but a folder. Yet there was something about her demeanor that made them uneasy. Her posture was upright, her gaze unwavering, and her expression gave away nothing. "Well," Judge Holloway demanded, breaking the silence, "what do you want?" "My name is Evelyn Carter," she began, her voice clear and strong, filling the room. "And I believe you and your colleagues have some explaining to do." The officers chuckled nervously at first, assuming this was some kind of prank or misunderstanding. But Judge Holloway's face darkened. There was something familiar about her name, though he couldn't quite place it. He squinted at her, trying to recall if they'd crossed paths before. Meanwhile, Evelyn didn't wait for an invitation to continue. She opened her folder and pulled out a stack of documents, laying them carefully on the table between them. "These are records of bribes accepted by you over the past 5 years," she said matter-of-factly. "Bank statements showing payments made to certain accounts linked to these officers." She pointed to specific names without hesitation. "And here," she slid another paper forward, "is proof of falsified testimonies arranged under your orders." The room fell deathly silent. The officers stopped laughing, their faces turning pale as they realized Evelyn wasn't bluffing. Judge Holloway's jaw tightened, his fingers gripping the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable, exposed. But Evelyn wasn't done yet. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small device, a recorder. Holding it up for everyone to see, she added, "Just in case anyone doubts my claims, let me assure you, I've been documenting everything. Every word spoken here today will be shared with the public unless we come to an understanding." Her words hung heavy in the air, like thunderclouds gathering before a storm. The men exchanged panicked looks, their earlier bravado evaporating completely. No one dared to speak. All eyes were on Evelyn, whose calm exterior masked the years of struggle and sacrifice that had brought her to this point. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: the game was no longer in Judge Holloway's favor. The tension in Judge Holloway's chamber was suffocating. The once jovial atmosphere had been replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioner and the sound of Evelyn's calm but commanding voice. She stood tall, her folder of evidence resting on the table, like a weapon aimed directly at the heart of their corrupt empire. Every document she laid out seemed to strip away another layer of their carefully constructed facade. Judge Holloway leaned forward, his face reddening with anger. "Who are you?" he demanded again, though this time his tone carried a hint of panic. "What gives you the right to barge into my chambers and make these accusations?" Evelyn didn't flinch. Instead, she met his gaze with unwavering resolve. "You ask who I am," she said, her voice steady and deliberate. "Let me remind you. My name is Evelyn Carter. I used to work in this very courthouse, not as a spectator, but as a prosecutor. Does that ring any bells?" For a moment, Judge Holloway froze, his mind racing back several years. Now he remembered. Evelyn Carter had been one of the sharpest prosecutors in the district, known for her relentless pursuit of justice. But then, suddenly, she disappeared from the scene. Rumors circulated about misconduct, incompetence, even corruption, but no one ever questioned where those rumors came from. Until now. "That's right," Evelyn continued, reading the flicker of recognition in his eyes. "You tried to destroy my career because you were afraid. afraid of what I might uncover when I started investigating the ties between your courtroom and the police department. So, you orchestrated lies, fabricated charges, and forced me out of my position. But what you didn't count on was that I wouldn't go quietly." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. The officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging nervous glances. They knew all too well how Judge Holloway operated. His ability to twist truths and bury inconvenient facts was legendary. But seeing it laid bare, especially by someone they dismissed as powerless, left them feeling exposed and vulnerable. "Now," Evelyn said, opening the folder wider and spreading its contents across the table, "let's talk about what's really going on here." She pointed to a series of bank statements showing transfers from shell companies to accounts linked to the judge and several officers. "These payments matched suspiciously well with cases you've dismissed or manipulated over the years. Coincidence? I think not." One of the younger officers wiped sweat from his brow, unable to meet Evelyn's piercing gaze. Another muttered under his breath, trying to rationalize their predicament. "This doesn't prove anything," he stammered weakly. "Anyone can forge documents." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, almost amused by the desperation in his voice. Without saying a word, she reached into her bag and pulled out something else, a flash drive. Holding it up for everyone to see, she explained, "This contains audio recordings, emails, and witness testimonies confirming everything I've shown you. And if that's not enough..." She paused for effect, letting the weight of her next words sink in. "I've already sent copies of all this evidence to federal investigators, journalists, and advocacy groups. Your secrets aren't safe anymore." The room erupted into chaos. The officers began arguing among themselves, some accusing others of being careless, while Judge Holloway slammed his fist on the table, shouting for order. But Evelyn remained calm, watching them unravel like threads pulled from a fraying rope. She had anticipated this reaction, their fear, their denial, their attempts to deflect blame. But she wasn't there to negotiate. She was there to expose. Finally, Judge Holloway turned to her, his usual arrogance replaced by raw desperation. "What do you want?" he snapped, his voice trembling. "Money. A deal. Name your price." Evelyn shook her head slowly, disappointment etched on her face. "It's not about what I want," she replied. "It's about accountability, for the victims whose voices you silenced, for the lives ruined by your greed, and for the trust you betrayed. You won't buy your way out of this, Judge Holloway. Justice isn't for sale." Her words hung in the air like a gavel striking its final blow. For the first time, Judge Holloway and his accomplices realized they weren't facing just another adversary. They were confronting someone who refused to be intimidated, someone who had nothing left to lose. And as Evelyn stood there, surrounded by men who once held all the power, it became clear that the tables had finally turned. The room was thick with tension, the kind that makes it hard to breathe. Judge Holloway's face had turned a deep shade of red, his usual composure shattered. He stared at Evelyn, his eyes darting between her and the damning evidence spread across the table. The officers were no better. Some sat frozen in their chairs, others fidgeted nervously, whispering among themselves in hushed tones. But Evelyn remained unshaken, her calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the chaos around her. "You think this is over?" Judge Holloway finally spat out, trying to regain control of the situation. "You can't just walk in here and accuse us of crimes without proof. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Evelyn didn't blink. Instead, she reached into her folder again and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Holding it up for everyone to see, she said, "This is a signed affidavit from one of your former clerks, the same person who helped you falsify documents and cover up misconduct. She's ready to testify against you." The room went silent. Even the officers stopped whispering, their faces pale with shock. Judge Holloway's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, searching for words that wouldn't come. Evelyn pressed on, her voice steady and confident. "And that's not all. I've also gathered statements from victims whose cases were dismissed under suspicious circumstances, people whose lives were destroyed because of your corruption. They're willing to speak out, too. One of the older officers, a grizzled man with a reputation for arrogance, stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, pointing a finger at Evelyn. "You're bluffing. You don't have enough to take us down." Evelyn simply smiled, a small, knowing smile that sent chills down their spines. Without saying a word, she pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. A video began playing, its volume loud enough for everyone to hear. It was a recording of a conversation between Judge Holloway and one of the officers, discussing how to manipulate a recent case. Their voices were unmistakable, their words incriminating. The color drained from Judge Holloway's face as he listened. He sank back into his chair, his hands trembling. The officers exchanged panicked looks, realizing there was no way out of this. Every lie they had told, every bribe they had accepted, every injustice they had committed, it was all coming back to haunt them. But Evelyn wasn't done yet. She placed her phone on the table and leaned forward slightly, her gaze sweeping over each of them. "There's more," she said softly, almost casually. "I've been live-streaming this entire confrontation online. Right now, thousands of people are watching, not just in this town, but across the country. Your secrets aren't hidden anymore." The impact of her words hit like a tidal wave. One officer dropped his glass, shattering it on the floor. Another buried his face in his hands, muttering curses under his breath. Judge Holloway looked like a man who had just seen his world crumble before his eyes. For years, he had operated behind closed doors, believing he was untouchable. Now, thanks to Evelyn, the whole world knew the truth. "Why are you doing this?" Judge Holloway asked, his voice barely above a whisper. There was no anger left in him, only desperation. "What do you want from us?" Evelyn straightened up, her expression softening slightly. "I don't want anything from you," she replied. "This isn't about revenge or personal gain. It's about justice, for the people you hurt, for the system you corrupted, and for everyone who believed in fairness but was let down. You took everything from me once, but I'm taking it back. Not just for myself, but for everyone else you've wronged." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The men in the room seemed smaller somehow, their bravado replaced by shame and fear. Evelyn glanced at the clock on the wall, then added, "Federal agents are already on their way. They'll be here within the hour. You can choose to cooperate, or you can try to run. Either way, your time is up." As she finished speaking, Evelyn picked up her folder and tucked it securely under her arm. She took a step back, surveying the scene one last time. The powerful men who had once ruled this town with impunity were now broken, cornered, and utterly defeated. And standing in the middle of it all was Evelyn Carter, a woman who had endured betrayal, loss, and hardship, but who had never given up on doing what was right. For the first time in years, hope flickered in the shadows of that dimly lit room. Change was coming. And it started with the minutes that followed Evelyn's revelation felt like hours. The room, once filled with laughter and celebration, was now a suffocating space of dread and despair. Judge Holloway sat slumped in his chair, his head in his hands, while the officers whispered frantically among themselves, their voices tinged with panic. Some suggested running. Others proposed destroying evidence, but none of them could shake the sinking feeling that they were out of options. Evelyn stood quietly, watching as the men who had once wielded so much power unraveled before her eyes. Outside the courthouse, chaos erupted almost instantly. News of the live stream spread like wildfire, igniting outrage across the town and beyond. Social media platforms buzzed with clips from the video, hashtags calling for justice trending within minutes. Protesters began gathering outside the courthouse, holding signs that read "No more corruption" and "Justice for all." Their chants echoed through the streets, growing louder with each passing moment. For years, the people of the town had felt powerless against the corruption that plagued their community. But now, thanks to Evelyn, they had a voice. Back inside the chamber, Judge Holloway finally broke the silence. His voice was hoarse, trembling as he spoke. "You've made your point," he said, looking up at Evelyn with a mixture of fear and resignation. "What happens next?" Evelyn crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "That depends on you," she replied. "You can either face the consequences of your actions or try to fight it. But I'll warn you, running won't save you. The evidence is already out there, and the public is watching." One of the officers, a younger man named Derek, suddenly stood up, his face pale but determined. "We didn't mean for things to go this far," he blurted out, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt. "It started small, just bending a few rules here and there. We never thought. You never thought anyone would hold you accountable." Evelyn interrupted, her tone sharp but controlled. "That's the problem with power. It blinds you. You stopped seeing the people you hurt because you were too busy protecting yourselves." Derek sank back into his seat, unable to meet her gaze. The others avoided looking at her altogether, their shame palpable. They had spent years dismissing victims, silencing witnesses, and manipulating the system, believing they were untouchable. Now, confronted by the woman they had underestimated, they realized how wrong they had been. As the clock ticked closer to the arrival of federal agents, Evelyn took a step forward, addressing the group one last time. "This isn't just about you," she said, her voice firm but tinged with emotion. "It's about everyone you failed. The families torn apart, the lives ruined, the trust broken. Justice isn't just for the powerful, it's for everyone. And today we're taking the first step toward fixing what you destroyed." Her words struck a chord, not just with the men in the room but with those watching online. Viewers flooded comment sections with messages of support for Evelyn, praising her courage and determination. Journalists began reaching out to her, eager to tell her story. Meanwhile, local leaders, who had long turned a blind eye to the corruption, found themselves scrambling to distance themselves from Judge Holloway and his accomplices. Finally, the sound of sirens pierced the air, signaling the arrival of federal agents. Within moments, the doors to the chamber burst open, and a team of investigators entered, their badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. They moved quickly, handcuffing Judge Holloway and the officers before leading them away. As they passed Evelyn, Judge Holloway paused, his eyes meeting hers for a brief second. There was no anger in his gaze, only defeat. Once the room was cleared, Evelyn exhaled deeply, the weight of the moment settling over her. She looked around at the empty chamber, now stripped of its former grandeur. It was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong, and everything that could still be fixed. Outside, the crowd cheered as the disgraced officials were led into police cars. Cameras flashed, capturing the historic scene. Evelyn stepped out of the courthouse, greeted by applause and tears of gratitude. People approached her, thanking her for standing up when no one else would. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope, not just for herself, but for the future of the town. Change wouldn't come overnight, but it had begun. And Evelyn Carter wasn't done fighting yet. In the days that followed, the town buzzed with a mix of excitement and disbelief. Evelyn Carter's name was on everyone's lips, her face plastered across newspapers, television screens, and social media platforms. The once quiet courthouse had become the epicenter of national attention, drawing reporters, activists, and curious citizens from all over the country. What had started as one woman's fight against corruption had ignited a movement, a call for accountability, transparency, and justice. For Evelyn, life became a whirlwind. She gave interviews to journalists eager to document her story, explaining how years of frustration and resilience had led her to this moment. Her calm demeanor and unwavering determination resonated deeply with people, especially women of color who saw themselves in her struggle. "I didn't do this alone," she often said during these interviews. "There were so many others who stood by me, victims, whistleblowers, advocates. This victory belongs to all of us." The fallout from Judge Holloway's arrest sent shockwaves through the legal system. Federal investigators worked tirelessly to untangle the web of corruption he and his accomplices had built over the years. Dozens of cases were reopened, some dating back decades, as authorities sought to right the wrongs committed under his watch. Victims who had long given up hope found new courage, stepping forward to share their stories. Their voices, once silenced, now demanded to be heard. Amidst the chaos, Evelyn received an unexpected phone call. It was from the state attorney general, offering her a position as the district attorney for the very same courthouse where she had faced so much injustice. At first, Evelyn hesitated. The scars of betrayal still lingered, and the idea of returning to a place fraught with painful memories felt daunting. But after much thought and encouragement from friends and supporters, she accepted the offer. "If I don't step up," she reasoned, "who will?" Her appointment marked a turning point not just for Evelyn but for the entire community. As the new district attorney, she wasted no time implementing reforms aimed at restoring trust in the legal system. She introduced policies requiring greater transparency in court proceedings, established independent oversight committees to review police conduct, and prioritized cases involving marginalized communities. Her office became a beacon of hope for those who had lost faith in justice. Evelyn also made it a priority to mentor young lawyers, particularly women and minorities, encouraging them to pursue careers in law and advocacy. "Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty," she told them during workshops and seminars. "It's about protecting the vulnerable, giving a voice to the voiceless, and ensuring that everyone is treated fairly under the law." Her passion inspired countless individuals, many of whom credited her with reigniting their belief in the power of change. As weeks turned into months, the town began to transform. Community meetings were held to discuss ways to prevent future corruption, and local schools incorporated lessons about civic responsibility and ethics into their curriculums. Statues honoring historical figures associated with the old regime were removed, replaced by monuments celebrating resilience and equality. Slowly but surely, the shadow of corruption lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Despite the progress, Evelyn knew there was still work to be done. Late nights at the office became routine as she poured her energy into rebuilding the broken system. Yet, even in moments of exhaustion, she reminded herself why she had started this journey: to ensure that no one else would have to endure what she had gone through. One evening, as she walked home from the courthouse, Evelyn paused to look back at the building bathed in the golden glow of sunset. For years, it had symbolized oppression and fear. Now, thanks to her efforts, it represented something different: hope, resilience, and the promise of a better tomorrow. With a small smile, she whispered to herself, "We're just getting started." Then, turning away, she continued walking toward the future she had helped create. Years passed, and the town that was once synonymous with corruption became a shining example of reform and resilience. Evelyn Carter's efforts as district attorney had not only dismantled a corrupt system, but also laid the foundation for a new era of accountability and fairness. Her name became synonymous with justice, inspiring countless individuals to stand up against wrongdoing in their own communities. The changes she spearheaded weren't just limited to the courthouse. They rippled outward, transforming the entire town into a model for others to emulate. One of Evelyn's proudest achievements was the establishment of a community justice center. Located near the courthouse, it served as a safe space where citizens could voice concerns, seek legal advice, or learn about their rights. The center hosted workshops on topics like police accountability, civic engagement, and how to navigate the legal system. It quickly became a hub of empowerment, particularly for marginalized groups who had long felt ignored by those in power. Evelyn often visited the center herself, sitting down with residents to listen to their stories and offer guidance. For many, seeing her there, accessible and approachable, was proof that things were truly changing. Her work didn't go unnoticed beyond the borders of the town. National organizations invited Evelyn to speak at conferences, sharing her journey and strategies for systemic reform. Schools included her story in textbooks, teaching students about perseverance, integrity, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Young activists, inspired by her courage, reached out to her for advice, often calling her a real-life superhero. Evelyn humbly accepted the praise, always reminding people that change required collective effort. "I'm just one person," she would say. "It takes all of us working together to make a difference." Despite her growing fame, Evelyn remained grounded. She continued living in the same modest home she'd occupied before her rise to prominence, refusing offers from developers eager to gift her luxury properties. Her mornings began with quiet reflection over coffee, and her evenings ended with walks through the neighborhood, where neighbors greeted her warmly. Children ran up to her, asking if she was really the woman who took down Judge Holloway. With a smile, she knelt down to their level and said, "Yes, but remember, you can be brave too. Everyone has the power to create change." As time went on, Evelyn noticed subtle yet profound shifts in the town's culture. People no longer hesitated to report misconduct or question authority figures. Trust between law enforcement and the community improved significantly, thanks to new policies promoting transparency and mutual respect. Officers underwent mandatory training on ethics and de-escalation techniques, and body cameras became standard issue. These measures helped rebuild bridges that had been burned by years of abuse and neglect. Evelyn also ensured that victims' voices remained at the forefront of every decision made in her office. She implemented victim support programs, ensuring survivors of crime received counseling, financial assistance, and legal representation. Walls inside the courthouse were adorned with quotes from advocates and philosophers, reminding everyone who entered that justice should serve humanity, not diminish it. Though proud of what she had accomplished, Evelyn never allowed herself to grow complacent. Corruption could creep back in if vigilance wavered, she knew. So she kept pushing forward, constantly seeking ways to improve the system. One of her final initiatives as district attorney was establishing an annual award ceremony honoring individuals who demonstrated extraordinary courage in fighting for justice. Recipients ranged from whistleblowers to grassroots organizers, each celebrated for their contributions to a fairer society. On the day Evelyn announced her retirement, the town gathered outside the courthouse to honor her legacy. Speeches were given, songs were sung, and tears flowed freely. As Evelyn stood on the steps addressing the crowd, she looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, rich and poor, united by hope, and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. "This isn't goodbye," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's a continuation. Justice isn't something you achieve once. It's something you fight for every single day. And I know this town will keep fighting." With that, Evelyn stepped down from the podium, leaving behind a legacy that would endure for generations. Her journey had come full circle, but the ripple effects of her actions would continue shaping lives long after she walked away.